Okay, so good afternoon. Cabinet has today signed off on the final draft bill which clarifies the functions of the GCSB and also significantly strengthens the oversight regime governing New Zealand's intelligence community. The final draft bill is an omnibus bill titled the Government Communications Security Bureau and Related Legislation Amendment Bill. It's got a mouthful, isn't it? The bill encompasses amendments to the GCSB Act of 2003, the Inspector General of Intelligence and Securities Act of 1996 and the Intelligence and Security Committee Act of 1996. The legislation is consistent with what we have previously flagged with you in the sense that it addresses issues raised in Rebecca Kitteridge's compliance review of GCSB. As you're aware, Rebecca's review showed that there are difficulties of interpretation in the existing GCSB Act. These difficulties mean the GCSB has, for some time now, been unable to carry out important aspects of its functions until legislation is clarified. These functions include assisting agencies such as the police and NZSIS and detecting and preventing cyber attacks on the public and private sector organisations in New Zealand. The compliance review of GCSB showed that the GCSB Act is not, and probably never was, fit for purpose. As a result, the responsible thing to do is to clarify legislation while at the same time strengthening the oversight regime governing our intelligence agencies so that the public can have confidence that they are operating within the law. The GCSB plays a vital role in protecting the security and safety of New Zealanders. It's been making and will continue to make significant contributions to our national security. The nature of the GCSB operations and the law governing its operations have come under increased public scrutiny over the past few months. This is understandable because the agency is able to exercise intrusive powers. It's essential, therefore, that we move to clarify the legislation around the GCSB so that it has a clear legal framework to operate within. Put simply, it needs to be clear what the GCSB can and cannot do. That is what the draft legislation is all about. I won't go through its vast details that the bill amends, as you've already heard much of it before and have also been briefed by senior officials in recent weeks. I'm making the final draft bill available to you this afternoon online on the Beehive website as an attachment to my press statement. It's the government's intention to introduce and debate the final bill later this week, subject to the House schedule. As you will be aware, Labour and the Greens have indicated they will not support legislation, and therefore in order to ensure the bill can pass a first reading this week and go to a committee for public submissions, it's necessary to have urgency to incorporate reduced sitting hours. With the support of Parliament for this legislation, the GCSB will be able to get on with its important tasks to safeguard our national security. The agency's cyber security function is becoming increasingly important as cyber attacks continue to grow. You may remember last month I told you that the number of cyber instances lodged with the National Cyber Security Centre had reached 79 for the year to date. That was more than half of the prior year's total. Today I can inform you that the number of cyber instances lodged with the National Cyber Security Centre has reached 138. That's more than the 136 for the whole of last year. What this shows is that the New Zealand's public and private sector organisations are facing increasing risks of cyber intrusion which could compromise their operations or businesses and even result in the theft of valuable intellectual property. Should the draft legislation I'm releasing today become law, the GCSB will be able to assist these public and private sector organisations to combat the growing cyber threat. It's my intention that the Intelligence and Security Committee will hold some public hearings on the bill in addition to receiving written submissions. The committee will meet to call for submissions in the days after the bill passes its first reading. Also this afternoon, Minister Amy Adams has released publicly a final draft of the Telecommunications Interception Capability and Security Bill, which modernises the current telecommunications regime. Updating the legislation will ensure that New Zealand's telecommunications companies have a clearer understanding of how to meet their interception obligations while ensuring network infrastructure remains secure. The offer period, as you'll be aware, for Mighty River Power shares closed at 5 on Friday. We won't be releasing any information about the retail demand or withdrawal until the book build is completed. This is due to securities law, but also to basic commercial tension as the bidding process with institutions is still ongoing. What I can say though is that we're pleased with the level of engagement from New Zealanders. The next few days are busy ones for ministers. The book build process with institution gets underway tomorrow, It's when institutional investors bid for shares at various prices and in doing so help us set the final share price. All investors ultimately pay the same price, but the institutions aren't eligible for the loyalty bonus that New Zealanders retail investors are entitled to. The ultimate decision on price is made by ministers, but the book build process allows us to determine what the market considers to be a fair price. The book build finishes on Wednesday, and then ministers consider all applications and make final price and allocation decisions. Those decisions will be based on the objectives we set at the start: widespread New Zealand ownership, at least 85% New Zealand ownership, and a good outcome for taxpayers. We'll be able to announce those decisions before Mighty River Power is listed on the NZX, which we expect that to happen on Friday. Just in terms of the House, on Tuesday this week we'll debate a motion to pay its respects to the Honourable Parakura Horomira and then to rise for the day as a mark of respect. As I alluded to earlier, it's the Government's intention to progress the first reading of the Telecommunications Bill and the Government GCSB and related legislation amendment bill. In terms of my activities, I'm in Wellington for caucus and the House, and I'm here on Wednesday too. On Thursday I'm at OTAC, on Friday we're in Wellington and then in Auckland. This weekend I'll be attending the National Party Lower North Island Regional Conference in Honolulu.
Prime Minister, on Aaron Gilmore, how would you evaluate his judgment as an MP?
Well, look, I think the decisions that he made on that particular night, whatever the exact details of which there are claims and counterclaims, clearly show that he demonstrated poor judgment that night. I think he is very disappointed in himself. We're disappointed in him. He has apologised now on a number of occasions. It's my expectation that he'll front up to Parliament tomorrow and that you as the media will have an opportunity to talk to him. And I'm sure the caucus will also have an opportunity to express its views on that tomorrow.
Did he mislead your office on Thursday? Because when you spoke to the media, you said as a group, he then later went on to clarify that it was just himself who acted poorly.
Well, I think what he did actually, I don't think he misled my office. I think what he did was absolutely, for the purposes of good order, clarify that the apology was from him.
It was pretty clear though, I mean, in your statement you said he was part of a group, and he said in his apology that as a group they were boisterous.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you'll need to put those questions to him because I clearly wasn't with him on the Saturday night.
Do you think he did mislead your office?
No, I don't think so, no.
Wouldn't it have been better if he had sort of publicly in front of the media apologised last week rather than doing it through Facebook and hiding away?
Look, he could have, those matters are in his hand. I mean, my office was speaking to him and trying to answer media queries that were put to us. In the end, it's for him to decide.
Was he given any advice to front of the media last week?
I don't believe so, no, but I have to check my chief.
So was that Christchurch lawyer wrong when he said that Gilmore had used the name of your office to intervene with the...
Well, you'll need to put that to Mr Gilmore tomorrow, but my understanding is that the point that we put in the statement we put out on whatever day it was, the Thursday or Friday of last week, counted that particular point and said that those particular words weren't used.
Isn't it usual that when an MP is in trouble, that they are given advice, particularly on how to deal with the media? Is this a sign that he's not particularly well liked in National?
No. Look, in the end, I haven't had extensive discussions with him, so I can't answer those particular questions. I don't know whether he'd asked for advice, and I can't tell you exactly what my chief of staff said to him because he had a number of conversations with him. I think the party's had a number of conversations with him over the last week or so since the story broke. So I can't give you all of the details. It's in the end up to him to decide when he fronts to the media and when he thinks that's appropriate. But my view is we're back to business tomorrow. He should be there. You have to ask him those questions.
Have you spoken to him yet?
No, I've had a text message from him. That's been really bad.
So you haven't spoken to him yourself?
No, my chief of staff has on a number of occasions, and we've made it quite clear to him that when Wayne Eggleston speaks to him, he speaks for me. And we've been very specific about the public statement we were putting out and the claims and counterclaims he made.
Do you have you or your office disagree with the office? Do you or your office disagree with the statements that lawyer Andrew Richards made?
I don't have a view on that. That's a matter you need to put to Mr.
But isn't that sort of pretty central to your office even?
Well, as I say, he's made counterclaims, and I accept that that's the perspective he's put up. We've also made it quite clear that we've done everything we actually can. I mean, we've publicly staff at the hotel wish to make a complaint, we thoroughly investigate it. We've asked Mr Gilmore specifically on that point, and he's been quite aware that we were putting out in a public statement that he countered that issue. We've raised the issues that have been raised through our office directly with him. He's 59th of 59 MPs, and he has no portfolio responsibility. So there becomes a point at which his behaviour clearly wasn't becoming of an MP on that particular night, but I think he would accept that and has apologised for that. He wouldn't be the first MP that's behaved badly in the history of this place, but hopefully he's learned a good lesson from
And
this
have
one.
you had other allegations? Have you been made aware of other allegations about his behaviour?
No, I mean, look, there's always a rumour mill that does the rounds, but I don't engage in it.
What about the claims that were in the Fairfax papers at the weekend that some sort of quote sleaze type incident had happened?
Yeah, well, I'm just not going to get into rumour and innuendo. If people have hard and serious facts they want to bring to either him or to my office, we'll answer them in due course.
And what about in terms of looking into it? I know that there was no complaint, but did you feel that your office might have a duty to look into what went on?
Well, I think we've done everything we practically can. I mean, there becomes a limit, as I said the other day. I mean, my office isn't a police force. I mean, claims have been made. He's refuted some of those claims. We've gone through a pretty thorough process with him. We've made it publicly clear. We've asked for people to come forward if that's necessary. We've done, I think, largely everything we actually can do. And there have been other claims in Parliament's history of MPs that have behaved badly. The argument that he should leave Parliament, well, that's a very different issue. We don't have control over that process, and that is MMP in its form, as Winston Peters knows, that Brendan Horan's currently still in Parliament. At the end of the day, the caucus could ask him to leave, but that would be a pretty big call on a claim and counterclaim case, and that would not mean that he would necessarily leave Parliament.
Are you sick of talking about this?
If you want to ask me about something else, I'm more than happy to answer those questions.
But is this frustrating for you, or is this distracting? Wouldn't it be easier for you if you just got to that?
Well, it would be easier if he behaved in a way that's becoming of a member of Parliament, but people make mistakes, and I hope he's learned a good lesson from this sort of stuff.
Has he been told by your office to come to Parliament tomorrow and front up the media?
I don't know what my office has communicated with him, but I've made it quite clear through the media, and would be my expectations that he turns up. I mean, he was at work today. He's a paid member of Parliament. He's got a job to do. If he's got some questions to answer to the media, then he should go and answer them.
What did his text to you say?
It was an apology to
Did
me.
you reply?
Yes, I replied, acknowledged the receipt.
When he apologised to the waiter in the second go at registering an apology, what's your understanding of what it was that he said?
Look, I don't know those details. You need to go and put that to him. I mean,
Yeah,
realistically,
We
the
have
risk
tried.
of,
Yeah,
the risk of, I've kind of said all I want to say on the matter. I mean, in the end, you need to go and ask him the questions. There's been claims and counterclaims made. I'm not going to go through them all. In the end, you can draw your own conclusions.
What sort of is the next step if something else comes out about this, about Aaron Gilmore, or if he does something silly again? Is he in any sort of final?
Well, look, I'm not going to speculate on that. I've made it pretty clear the expectations of my MPs. I've been Prime Minister for 4.5 years and leader of the National Party for 6.5 years. And in my view, the behaviour of my MPs in the period of time that I've been the leader has been, for the most part, pretty high. I'm not saying they're perfect. People make mistakes, or they do silly things. But I spend a lot of time talking to them about my expectations of how they will behave and how they should behave. As I said on Breakfast TV this morning, in my opinion, you earn respect. You don't just get respect because somehow the National Party got some votes and you became a member of Parliament, or even the people of your electorate voted you in. You need to earn that respect, and that respect can and will be lost by the New Zealand public if you do something dumb.
What are Mr Gilmore's strengths as an MP?
Well, he's quite a bright guy underneath all this. If he isn't always demonstrating in his antics on Saturday night, he has some commercial understanding. I think he worked actually, and I've had a number of people contact me and say, look, he worked hard for them in Christchurch East when there were the issues after the earthquake. So, look, in the end, there's a number of attributes I'm sure he's got, but he's also got some faults, and they were on display when he undertook that activity that night.
Is he a serial big noter?
I'm just not going to go into those details.
You've said a few times now that caucus could vote him out, but it doesn't mean kick him out of Parliament. Like, you wouldn't want him to stay, would you? Because it would upset your numbers if he was kicked out.
Want him to stay or want him to leave?
Well, you wouldn't want caucus to kick him out and for him to stay on.
Well, look, in the end, as I say, I mean, that's a matter for caucus whether they chose to take that action. No, I don't think it's like.
It'd be bad for National's numbers, though, wouldn't it?
Well, it's like.
What, just on GCSB legislation, what parties are supporting it at this group?
You need to ask them all directly, but I'm confident we've got the numbers.
Have you got New Zealand First as
Well, I've written to Mr. Peters this afternoon. I've asked him if he'd like to have a meeting and have a discussion about his recommendations. I've sought some advice on the workings of his recommendations, which are around a panel, and I would believe that's possible as a way through to have their support. We need to sort of work our way through the details, but I'm certainly not ruling them out.
You mentioned there were 138 cases of cyber intrusion.
Yes.
Were any of those from governments or from particular Chinese governments?
Yeah, I can't go into the specific details of the source of those cyber intrusions, but it's fair to say there's been a large number.
Can you tell us what you got up to on Saturday?
On Saturday, I was in Auckland.
Can you tell us your office didn't stay? I mean, was there a reason?
Well, you asked me why I didn't go to the funeral?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason was we took advice from the senior kaumātua about, because I could have gone on the Saturday, it was always possible, but I cleared my diary to go on the Friday. I was more than happy to go on the Saturday, and I made that quite clear to my office. But the advice of the senior kaumātua in Parliament was the appropriate day for me to go was Friday. That's to go on the Saturday is thinking about it in a sort of, put as a Pākehā sort of way, that the tangi lasted 4 days, it's showing up, it's important. I had the opportunity to speak and express the government's perspective on the great work of Parakura on the Friday, and I was able to take with me a big group of MPs, including the Deputy Prime Minister. So it was nothing to do with my diary on the Saturday.
But would it have been inappropriate to go on 2 days? I mean, I know it's well into schedule, but would it have been inappropriate or was it?
Well, no, it wouldn't have necessarily been inappropriate, but I think it's a matter of how you mark your respect. I mean, I had a lot of respect for Parakura. As I said, I would be more than happy to go on the Saturday and make that quite clear. But the decision was made that was the best day for me, and that was the best advice we had from the senior cultural advisor in Parliament.
Do you have a date for the by-election, and if not, what's the process you're going through now?
I've had some brief advice. I've got a tentative date they're looking at. I think there's some real technicalities around the point at which the Speaker has advisement, I think, of the passing in a technical sense, obviously. And so soon after that, I'll be able to give you that date.
You can't really release it now, it's hardly state secret, really.
No, look, it's hardly a state secret. It's mid to late June of the recommendations, which we can that date.
Just on the GCSB issue, the upshot is that it will now be legal for the GCSB to spy on New Zealanders if there's due suspicion by a related agency.
Okay, I think it's important to understand it will be legal for them to carry out the activities they previously carried out that they believed to be legal, and for which there is at least a debate about the clarity of the current law. Secondly, that activity would be undertaken even if we didn't pass this legislation. The question would, because it's necessary, the question is which agency would undertake it, and we would need to replicate GCSB's technical capability in SIS and the police and defence. And the view of the government, and actually the long-standing view of previous governments, has always been it makes sense to have that capability in one place, and that's in GCSB.
So how will that help fight cyber terrorism? Like to a length, obviously that's coming in from off, I'm not an expert, but...
Sure, so let's say there's a cyber attack on a major New Zealand company, or any company. The GCSB can go and provide both advice, but also technical capability. Can go in and see where the intrusion's coming from, what's happening, what information might be exfiltrated, what the impact is actually on their computer systems. But to technically do that, it's eminently possible that they'll actually interact with information that relates to New Zealanders, and so that, for the purposes of the law, could be deemed to be a surveillance of New Zealanders.
Yeah,
so that's
trying to help.
Trying to help could be deemed to be, well, if it wasn't for clarifying the law, it could be a breach of the law.
But aside from that, the GCSB will also be able to do surveillance of New Zealanders where those other agencies have warrants to do so, right?
Absolutely, that's the issue. On an under-agency, yes. So basically, Section 14 will stay, but Section 14 will only stay for effectively foreign intelligence gathering, and where there is warranted activity or where the activity is deemed to be legal under agency support, they'll be able to provide that. And that was always what the belief was. The belief was always, I think, Section 8 was equal to Section 14, and therefore it was possible to do that, even though Section 14 said they couldn't actually undertake surveillance work on New Zealanders. Section 8 gave them specific provision to do that. But the question is, under the law, is that right? And that's been the matter of difficulty of interpretation.
Is there an investigation
into the leak of the GCSB report? Was your investigation?
I don't have any information on the update of that. They're working on it, I guess.
Have you had any updated advice from the Inspector General about those 88?
No, he's working on those cases.
As the Tourism Minister, any concerns raised by the current report of the Fox Glacier tragedy? Have you
Well,
any changes that you're looking at post that?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is, look, I'm just heartbroken for those families. I mean, there were, I think, 9 people on board that plane. They lost their loved ones, and at the end of the day, if you read the report, at least in part, it looks as there's an argument about whether it was preventable. I mean, there's no absolutely firm decision about what caused the accident, but there's a number of factors. I mean, what I would say is that we've received a letter from Mr. Coker on behalf of the families. We'll respond to that in due course. There's some things he's asking for which aren't possible, or the government won't want to change its position on, and they are largely in relation to allowing essentially for parties to sue, and that's not possible obviously under the ACC no faults claim. There are other recommendations that come out of the coroner's report, like safety belts, for instance. Seem an eminently logical suggestion to me, and we'll be following up on those to see if they can be implemented.
How safe do you think adventure tourism is in New Zealand, and why? You often think it's safe, I take it. Why?
Well, for the most part, yes, I think it is safe, and it's become safer with the changes that we made to the regulations that we looked at in 2009, passed in 2011, which include audit now and registration of businesses and the likes. It's been made safer by the reinforcement of the drug and alcohol policy again, some work that we did in 2011-12. The real issue here, actually, I think, with this industry is that it's got a lot of participants. They range in size and range in activities, and for the most part, many of them are very, very, very safe, great safety record and good focus on safety. But there are 1 or 2 operators that have really badly let down New Zealand and the industry. And so if you go and look at something like, I don't know, AJ Hackett bungee jumps in Queenstown, they've had, I think, over 1 million jumps, no issues, in a very safe company. But then you've had other instances where smaller operators have caused the death of individuals. And we just can't have that. It's a really important part of New Zealand's tourism offering.
The parents say that the CAA doesn't have enough resources to monitor the industry properly. Is that something, an area you could look at?
Well, I'm sure that's something that will be tested with the Minister of Transport, I think it is, that comes in the CAA. I can't recall any advice that would indicate that's the case. I mean, I think, each country has different rules, but my experience, those agencies tend to work, across regions and across country, across different boundaries to check that they're applying the best law or the best way of administering that. So I'm sure that's something that the Minister will look at.
Just going back to the GCSB oversight mechanisms, you said that they will be strengthened. Are they, to some extent, still a work in progress then? Because you mentioned you were talking to Mr. Peters about his panel.
Yeah.
What are the essential features, do you think, that have to be in that oversight mechanism to make it effective in a new environment?
Yes, at the moment, the recommendations are to add on to currently there's a director of Inspector General, should I say, to add a deputy inspector. The second thing is to ensure that, essentially allow the appointment of a person not necessarily to be a High Court judge, a retired High Court judge. Thirdly, to give more resources to that office. And fourthly, to widen their mandate to allow them to enforce them actually proactively to look at a wider range of areas and actually to sign off each year on the fact that the inspector believes that those agencies are complying with the law and complying with the way the law is prescribed by politicians. So the point here is that we're essentially adding another layer both with the deputy inspector and also with the additional people. So Mr. Peters, from what I can see, is largely saying that that should be a panel of people. So there's a couple of options there. One is the equivalent of the Reserve Bank model, where you have the governor has the responsibility, but in fact there's an advisory panel, and the governor still makes the final decision, but does so after meeting with the panel. The second is there's a couple of other commercial models that operate, as in some of our more commercial agencies have a model where there is a panel and there's a rotating chairman, and that person just moves. And so either one of those are a panel type option. That could, Mr. Peters also wants someone of legal training there, retired High Court Judge, I assume, be one of the panel members. Again, that's eminently possible. So it's not impossible we could work out a deal with Mr. Peters if that's where he wants to go.
So is this the first time that you've approached Mr. Peters for a formal meeting about legislation since he's been back?
I think there's certainly been other things where nationally and New Zealand First have worked together. So there are a number of things that we're working on with New Zealand First.
But in terms of it?
But probably meeting him, yes.
Yeah,
I would have thought so, yes.
Yeah. So you'll actually meet with him?
If he wants to, I'll certainly put that off in writing.
What are those other things?
Oh, there's a number of things that we've been working on. I don't know if we've actually publicly released them yet.
Yeah, I was just wondering that.
But there's one or two things we've been working on with Ben. But, yeah.
You can't say what it is.
I just can't be sure whether they've been released. That's all.
Won't be over a whiskey bottle, will it?
No, I don't think so. I don't really like whiskey.
Are they packet?
Yeah, one of them has a financial component to it, yes.
Just wanted to run by your comment, I think you made it earlier in the week, it was just about Wellington. I just wanted to check it wasn't sort of like one of those ironic things you just mentioned that even Wellington was dying and all of Wellington had was we had a workshop at Victoria University and
What I was talking about, they're asking me about regional development.
Yeah.
And what the point I was making is that there's pressure on lots of the regions. It was to really do with the increase in infrastructural demand in Auckland, and couldn't we move more people out? And I said, look, the obvious example is Wellington, where when I first came to work in Wellington between 84 and 87, there was pretty much most head offices were here. The bank's head offices were here, a lot of commercial entities were here, the dairy board was here. And these days, when you really look at it, the major head offices have moved out of Wellington. Fundamentally, you've got government, which is still very large, obviously Victoria University, and you've got better workshops. And you've got lots of other businesses as well. But I was really talking about that big head office level and what could be done to maybe attract some more things back there.
Do you think the city is dying though? Or?
No, I don't think it's dying, but I think it's an example of the contraction that's happening at sort of Auckland's expense. And so that presents issues for us around, there's both a lot of pressure on Auckland's infrastructure, but also there's real pressure for us to try and make sure that, we have to do everything we can to make sure that these cities outside of Auckland are seen as attractive places for other businesses to be established.
Promise, just on those cyber attacks, 59 of them in this update, 79 to 138.
Yeah.
Are any of them serious? For people who are sceptical out there, are these serious? I know you can't say too much, but what are these things?
Well, they're either a significant attempt to get into the databases of government agencies, which you can imagine that would be very serious if you could infiltrate, immigration or education or other databases, or they are direct cyber attacks on some of our major companies. Again, that could be very serious, both in terms of...
And this is within those 59 that we're talking about here?
I'd have to exactly check the particular ones you're talking about, but over time, the sorts of cases I've been briefed on by GCSB include that gamut, which are very large companies and who have had major cyber attacks where they threaten both the security of their system, the readability of their system, and also the information they might hold. So for commercial reasons, that's a very serious matter for those companies. It could be the loss of intellectual property, it could be greater knowledge about their pricing capability, any kind of growth or expansion plans they've got.
So in terms of this argument that, the cyber attacks are just a cover to clean up all the problems with the GCSB, what do you say to those out there advancing that argument?
Well, I can't see why they'd run that argument, because if you really look at it, we're not actually expanding the activities of GCSB as I see it. We are legally clarifying what we believe the previous law to be, albeit it's now very much, as we legally said, subject to interpretation. So that's the main thing it's doing, but that's actually not technically new prior to the point at which we stopped that activity and went through this process, for a long period of time that's been happening. So it's not really new, it's just a clarification of current law. We're significantly strengthening the oversight of those agencies, and this work around cyber is a new threat, but I think most New Zealanders would accept that that's real. I mean, it's quite clear that there's been cyber attacks, and if they don't believe us, they should go and ask a few major public companies in New Zealand whether they think they've ever had a cyber attack on them.
What proportion of those attacks would be domestic in origin as opposed to foreign in origin?
I don't have those details on me, sorry.
When do you expect to have it passed to law?
It'll be this year, for sure. So there'll be a select committee, or it's not technically a select committee, it's an intelligence security committee meeting. It will have a sort of, I'd say, truncated process, but this process, so I'd say by the mid to later part of the year.
In the last couple of weeks, the debate about how government debt slows growth has changed a bit. Overseas, some of the research has been slightly discredited. Do you still think the best thing your government can do to get growth going is to reduce debt?
Yes, and the reason for that is, firstly, we've run a considerable amount of debt, Minister of Finance might argue too much debt, over the course of the last 5 years to ease ourselves through the dislocation that occurred as a result of the global financial crisis, Christchurch earthquakes and everything else. So it hasn't been like we haven't been prepared to use the balance sheet. But we're a small country, we're an open trading nation, we have considerable private sector debt, and we rely on foreign savings to finance our future. And on that basis, I think that if we are excessive with our spending and therefore build up debt, eventually some generation of New Zealanders needs to pay that back. And I think New Zealanders, rightfully so, would feel very concerned and vulnerable that the government couldn't actually respond. So if you go back to the Christchurch earthquake, we did a lot of things that weren't conventional. I can't think of another government that's actually bought everybody's house that was in the equivalent of the red zone, and actually paid employees for 10 weeks when their businesses couldn't operate. They were very non-conventional things. But we were able to do that and billions more in terms of the rebuild because the balance sheet was strong enough to do that. So my view is that as a country we haven't suffered. In fact, our growth rate's one of the highest in the developed world. Really only Australia's grown quicker than us. In fact, the BNZ came out today and said they expect New Zealand's growth rate to be stronger for the next few years. So I don't think we're suffering as a result of economic growth from having a conscious view to get back to surplus.
But the research shows that debt only becomes a problem when it's significantly closer to 100%. Ours is still quite a lot.
It's 28 or something, 20.
So why are you so worried about that?
Because eventually, it's one thing to be a reserve currency like the United States of America and have very large levels of debt. In principle, they have ways to cope with that, but we don't. And in the end, if we have high levels of debt, eventually the rating agencies will downgrade us again. And I think over time, that does lead to a bigger premium on the borrowing that New Zealand companies have to pay.
Because our interest rates, the 10-year bond yield is much lower now than it was before that.
Yeah, but our interest rates are still high and may well still be a bigger risk premium. So, look, in the end, it depends on your view, but my view is that New Zealand's a much stronger country from having a good, healthy balance sheet. We should try and preserve that.
Would you be introducing the GCSB Belonged agency if the House wasn't sitting under the Just House tomorrow?
You'd have to ask the leader of the House that, but the problem we've got is we lose a day tomorrow, and unless we can get support of Labour and the Greens, then it would be a very long and drawn-out process, and we've got a lot of work to get through. So I think we've tried to get there, but that's failed.
What's your understanding of the process for the MMP review and Justice Minister's last statement, I think, was that she was going to consult with other parties to reach consensus. Do you have any updates on that? Or do you know where it's at?
Not really. I know she's working on kind of a spreadsheet, if you like, of looking at all the different positions that different parties have. And I think the next step is she needs to make a recommendation about what happens next.
Has she actually attempted to get consensus? Do you know?
I don't know. You need to ask her.
Did Business New Zealand consult you about their open letter and campaign against?
I wasn't aware of it. I know Cliffy spoke to my office, but I don't think so. I certainly wasn't aware of it. First I saw about this when I saw it paper.
Professor, just on tourism again and skydiving.
Sorry, and skydiving.
Yep. Do you have any reports as tourism minister about how safe skydiving is in New Zealand?
I can't think of any particular report I had. I mean, I've had plenty of reports about adventure tourism, and some of them may record some sort of point about that, but I can't recall any of them. I mean, I think for the most part, again, a lot of people go skydiving in New Zealand, and for the most part, it's been a very safe activity.